ahead of time, filling out forms for character traits, denouement, and different things like that, which I think is going to help me in the long run.
Good. Well, that's a step in the right direction anyway. Next person up, Cassie Picard. Cassie's a veteran of many of these retreats. Cassie, what have you got to share?
Oh, hi, Bill. I am once again reminded over and over that, call it the cat syndrome. And what I mean by that is you circle 3 times, you find your cushion, you sharpen your pencils, you sit down, and you finally have a chance to get it done. It's so easy for me to be thinking about writing, but unless I actually put my tush in the chair, it doesn't happen. And then once I get writing, somehow I can write more. It flows. And one of the things that's so beneficial about the retreat is you're forced to pay attention and you are open to criticism, which is fantastic. And you are ready to be looking at what you do. And you're not just waiting for the water to boil for your tea. So there is something that happens with the process that I have to remind myself again and again, just do it. And I learn from all the participants so much every time. And I take away something that hopefully makes my work a little better. But the most important thing I've discovered is that I just have to do the work. And that's not always easy, but I have to do it.
Great bit of wisdom there. And our last tip is coming from Lynette Bennett, also a veteran of several workshops. And if I may brag, I believe she's just received an offer from a publishing house for her first book, a memoir. Lynette, what would you like to share?
It's always the right time to work with you, Bill. Although it seems the busiest time in the world. A few days ago, I had a knee replacement. So I'm in a lot of pain. I'm taking pain meds. You would think this is the worst time in the world for me to do something serious like this. But actually, it's a terrific time. I need to finish off my manuscript. And I knew you'd help me get that done, Bill. So thank you. I'm gaining a lot. I'm
so glad you could see me. In all those times I thought you were looking at me with rapt attention, it was really just the drugs.
Oh, it was your charm all along. It was your charm.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming and for sharing your tips. I think we'll probably do an online, even if the world goes back to normal. It seems like there are a few advantages, so we'll probably do this again sometimes. Thanks for sharing. My interview this time is with William Martin, the New York Times bestselling author of many wonderful historical novels. This man is a serious and careful craftsman, taking care not only with the research and the writing, but with the prose itself, one of the finest prose stylists in the popular fiction world. But that's not our topic. This time, primarily, I wanted him to talk about, the historical aspects, what he's known best for, the research, which I know many writers find daunting. Here's what he had to say. William Martin, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here.
You have been called, actually by more than one entity or person, the king of the historical thriller.
Yeah, it's good to be king.
Yeah, no doubt. You just can't wait to be king. And now did you have?
But uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.
That's probably true. And yet I don't think anybody is even close in this department. Did you, when you were going to Harvard or USC Film School, or did you think historical thrillers, that's what I want to do one day?
Well, I fell in love when I was a kid with the movies that were set in the past. My movie-going career began with movies like The Searchers with John Wayne, the great John Ford movie, or Lawrence of Arabia, or Mutiny on the Bounty with Marlon Brando, the 1962 version, or The Alamo with John Wayne. Movies about characters who were larger than life, and yet whose human foibles were all too apparent once you'd gotten a little bit closer to them. And so I just became fascinated when I was a kid with the adventure of history, but the subtext as well. And when I got older and started thinking about things to write about, it was usually material that was historically based. Mm-hmm. And I actually came along in Hollywood when I was trying to break in Hollywood at a time when historically based material was not really as popular as stuff like Easy Rider or movies like that, or the psychedelic movie craze. Period pieces were frowned upon in film school because you were never going to be able to get them produced because they required enormous investments of capital. And that's just before you even started with the story and the screenplay, that just the capital of creating the sets and the costuming and so forth. So I was sort of a fish out of water at that kind of critical moment when you get your career started. Fortunately, when you write novels, if you want to have a scene that includes a storm at sea, the only thing limiting you is your ability to create an interesting storm at sea through the words that you write, because the place that the movie is playing in your mind's eye, and your mind's eye is projecting it onto the screen in the reader's head. So I have much greater freedom to write whatever I want historically as a novelist than I would have had as a screenwriter. And then you just find yourself folding another element into the historical material, the thriller element. And I don't really differentiate between the page-turning literature that you and I aspire to write and real literature, quote unquote, so-called serious fiction, because to me, good storytelling about anything is good storytelling, right?
Yeah. You make the history spellbinding,
right.
Though, and without taking as many liberties as Hollywood usually does,
right?
With a historical subject. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that? How do you? Well, I'll break it down. First of all, how do you do the research?
Well, the first thing you have to do is get excited about some period in history or some moment that you want to write about. For example, my new book, which is called December 1941, I got the idea for it. And I'm not going to tell you what the idea is, but I got the idea while I was watching that movie about Churchill that came out last year. I think it was called The Darkest Hour. And I thought it was a great movie. And there's a scene where Churchill is on the phone with FDR, and he is totally crestfallen. He's crushed because FDR politically just simply can't help Churchill any further than he has helped him there in 1940. And I was watching that scene in the movie, and I'm thinking to myself, about a year and a half from now, those two guys are going to be the best of friends. And they're going to be on the phone on the night of December 7th, 1941. And Churchill's going to ask Roosevelt, what's all this about Pearl Harbor? And Roosevelt is going to say, it's quite true. We're all in the same boat now. And Churchill, as he will later write in his compendium of the war, goes to sleep that night contemplating the endless power of the United States, the industrial power of the United States. And as he writes, I slept the sleep of the saved and thankful. It all came to me out of that one scene. I said, I'm going to write about these guys and a big fictional plot as well. And then I just dove into the story that I wanted to write, which begins in Los Angeles and then takes us on the Super Chief across America and brings us to Washington, D.C. And so the research has required that what I always do, which is I find the most generalized texts that I want to that I think will help me, that will allow me to get a broad overview of the period that I'm writing about. And then I start boring holes down into the research after that. So in the case of this book, I've read John Meacham's book, Franklin and Winston, and I've read some of their correspondence. And then for more specific research, I have traveled in California to the Railroad Museum, where they actually have the dining car where 2 or 3 of the scenes in the book take place. And so we go from the most kind of godlike research from the most aerial perspective down to the ground level, where we try to capture as much of the sensual and textual perspective as we can get. So I bounce back and forth. Mm-hmm. And, I'm reading a lot of newspapers from December of 1941 as well.
Contemporary ones of the time, you mean?
Yeah. And though if I was to tell any would-be historical novelist what the best tool for getting yourself back there into the past would be, I would say that it is to read the old newspapers and try to read them as you do when you sit down to read them with as much of an effort of just putting yourself in that time and wondering what it must have been like to read this story or that story, not from our perspective, but from the perspective of people on the other side of the timeline. I did it a lot with Bound for Gold, my last novel about the gold rush. Mm-hmm. I found a fantastic gathering of newspapers, old California newspapers, at one of the university websites that I acknowledge at the introduction of the novel, one of the University of California websites. And you could go and read the Alta California, which was the first newspaper in San Francisco. You could read all about the rise of the vigilantes and everything that happened leading up to the rise of the vigilantes, which is an important part of the novel in the last act. And you'll get material. You won't just get detail. You'll get your drama. There's a trial that the newspapers write about in June of 1851. And I read about that trial. And I said, my God, this is so dramatic, I don't even need to make it up. I'll just plug my characters into it. And so when you read Bound for Gold, you'll find that the trial is right there. And it wasn't really a trial. It was more like a kangaroo court in a firehouse. Mm-hmm. And they took the guy out and hanged him, which was the whole objective anyway. But it's that kind of tool that really is one of your first weapons when you sit down to write a historical novel, I think.
Are you finding more and more that you can find those sources online? You mentioned a university website, papers from like World War II. Where do you find that?
Just sitting right here at my desk, right on the computer. There are so many, this is one of the plus sides to living in this digital era. We've talked about the challenges that the digital world presents in terms of getting people's attention for physical books and so forth. But that's one of the downsides. But for somebody that wants to do research, there are enormous amounts of research avenues right here on your computer. And you just need to know how to track them down. And once you can get over the wall, you will find unbelievable gatherings of material. For example, the book I wrote before Bound for Gold was called The Lincoln Letter. And I wanted to bring Civil War Washington to life. I wanted you to see what it looked like and felt like to be in a city that was as incomplete in its way as the whole nation was. One of the great places to access was the Library of Congress photo file, which includes images of that city in 1861, 2, 3, 4, that I had never seen in a book. One of them is this amazing photograph taken from Capitol Hill, looking out along what we now know as the Mall, out toward the Smithsonian Castle, which is the only building at the time on the Mall. And you see the ancient canal that was cut through Washington in